The story of Moses and the Israelites leaving Egypt is a tale of courage, faith, and destiny that has captivated generations for centuries. It is a story of one man's journey from a life of privilege to a life of purpose and the incredible obstacles he overcame to lead his people to freedom. This time on You, Me, and the Word. Welcome. Last time I told you about Joseph, who went to Egypt as a slave, but rose through the ranks to be able to save Egypt and really the whole Middle East from a severe famine. With Pharaoh's blessing, the king of Egypt, he brought his whole family, his father, stepmothers, 12 brothers, his sisters, his brothers' wives, and their children to live in Egypt so they could all survive the famine. Over 400 years they thrived there. The Bible then says, there arose a new king over Egypt. Well, I would think so after 400 years. But all of this is to let us know that all of the great things that Joseph did to save Egypt and the promises made by the king in his time had been forgotten. By now, the Israelites, or Hebrews, had grown so numerous that the Egyptians were afraid they would take over, or at least help the Egyptians' enemies. To try to control them, the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites. And no matter how hard the Egyptians worked them, their numbers just grew and grew. Enter Moses. He was born in Egypt during a time when the Pharaoh had decreed that all male infants were to be killed. To save her son, Moses' mother placed him in a basket and set him adrift on the Nile River. Miraculously, the basket was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who raised Moses as her own son. As Moses grew older, he learned of his true heritage, and he felt, called to lead his people out of bondage. He witnessed the suffering and oppression of the Hebrews, and he knew he could no longer sit idly by. He took matters into his own hands, killing an Egyptian taskmaster who was mistreating a Hebrew slave. And this act forced Moses to flee Egypt and seek refuge in the desert. For many years, Moses lived as a shepherd in the wilderness until one day he encountered a burning bush that was not consumed by the flames. It was there that he heard the voice of God, who told him that he had been chosen to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt into the promised land, the land promised to Abraham over 400 years before. And it was here that God told Moses God's special name, I am. Isn't that a strange name? It really means more than that. It means I was, I am, I will be. And this is something important to remember. It will be especially important for later videos when we talk about Jesus. Remember, God's name, in English at least, is I am. So even at the end of this conversation with God, Moses was understandably hesitant to accept this enormous responsibility, but with the help of his brother Aaron, he eventually confronted the Pharaoh and demanded the release of his people. Let my people go. That may be familiar to you if you've ever seen the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston. The Pharaoh, though, was stubborn and he refused to let the Hebrews go. So God sent a series of plagues to Egypt to convince the Pharaoh otherwise. First, there were frogs everywhere. Next up was lice. And of course, that's just ugh. Then came gnats, which were so annoying, and the plagues just kept coming, one thing right after the other. And they got progressively worse and worse, with diseased livestock and boils, just to name a few. Finally, God sent down the ultimate plague, the angel of death, who took the firstborn of every household in Egypt. But the Israelites were protected because they put lamb's blood on their doors that told the angel of death to pass over that house. And this is what the Jewish people celebrate at Passover. And there is a huge connection to Jesus' death and resurrection during Holy Week and Easter, otherwise known as Resurrection Day, but more about that in a future video. Back in Egypt, even Pharaoh's son was killed, and he was devastated and finally agreed to let the Israelites go. And they were on their way out of Egypt when Pharaoh had a change of heart and sent his army after them. The Israelites were stuck between, well, a rock and a hard place, more accurately, the Red Sea and the Egyptian army. But God was with them. And through Moses, he parted the Red Sea so that the Israelites could cross over on dry land. And the Egyptian army tried to follow them, but the sea closed in on them and they drowned. And while that's not the happiest ending for them, it was definitely a win for the Israelites. So the Israelites were finally free from their slavery. And they go to Mount Sinai to celebrate and worship God, worship the Lord. And it was here that Moses received the 10 Commandments and the rest of the law. It was this law, this rule of life, that would turn this group of people into a nation. It was different from the laws of the countries around them. And it helped to make them a separate people, a people set apart for God, by God, a people through whom all the peoples of the world would be blessed, as God had promised to Abraham so long ago. But they were not in the promised land yet. They had a chance to go there right away. But when they saw the people living there and how strong they were afraid. Even after everything that God had done for them in Egypt, the power they saw, they didn't fully trust God yet. God then gave them the opportunity to learn and really bond as a nation. They spent the next 40 years wandering around in the desert, complaining and grumbling about the lack of food and water, but God led them and took care of them. They learned to depend entirely on God. The journey was not easy, and they faced many challenges along the way, but with Moses' leadership and the help of God, they persevered. In the end, they reached the promised land, and Moses was able to glimpse it from afar before he died. His legacy, however, lived on, and the story of his courage and his faith has inspired countless people throughout history. The tale of Moses leaving Egypt is a testament to the power of perseverance and the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to be held in bondage. It is a tale about the power of faith. It is one of the defining stories that is referenced again and again in the Bible. Next time, I will tell you about Moses' successor, Joshua, who leads the people into the promised land. Make sure that you don't miss it by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. See you again soon.